They are creating mini human brains now to power AI.
Now, the biggest trends is like these killer robot dogs.
I never thought that in 2024 we would be talking about like, hey, the biggest trend is killer robotic dogs. I'm Stephanie Keith.
And I am Tara Manjekovic, and we are unapologetically outspoken. Hey, everybody. Happy Monday. So we thought it was time for another AI episode because there is just never a lack of literally creepy and disturbing shit happening in the world of artificial intelligence. Don't you think, Stephanie?
Yes. And we have to kick it off with like what I think is the biggest AI news of the year, which is that OpenAI's partnering with Apple. So, like the two biggest, brands in the industry are joining forces. Now, OpenAI published this on their website on June 10th, and they said, quote, OpenAI and Apple announced partnership to integrate ChatGPT into Apple experiences, coming to iOS, iPad, and Mac later this year. So basically, what they're going to do is take Siri, which is like the Apple's version of like Alexa, and ChatGPT, and they're going to work hand in hand. So, like, Siri will get information from ChatGPT and then relay it to the user to answer all of your questions. And so they had this like conference where they were announcing this, and Apple software chief Craig Federighi said that it's going to allow people to ask for help with things like recipe ideas, room decorations, and composing a story. So he said, quote, suppose you want to create a custom bedtime story for your 6-year-old who loves butterflies and solving riddles. Just put in your initial idea and send it to ChatGPT. And so while this sounds like cute, and of course they're using these like cute little examples to launch it, um, I think like there's some practical implications behind this that are exciting. Like I personally love ChatGPT. I think it helps my business run better. There's a lot of pros to it, but do the pros outweigh the major concerns? And especially when it comes to data privacy. So I didn't even realize this, Tara, but I guess Apple has really been like a champion of data security. And they have a lot of people's biometric data because you use the Face ID to open your phone and banking and all that kind of thing. But what they've done with that up until now is they only store that data on the device. So it never leaves the phone and goes to an external server. And I guess they were also like the only company that stood up for user privacy and told the FBI to go pound sand when the FBI tried getting backdoor access to user data with Apple. They wouldn't allow it. But now I guess Apple has shifted away from all of that with this latest iOS 18 update, where they are going to move to a server side AI processing because they have to in order to handle the advanced AI functionalities that the device alone can't do by itself. So now this is bringing up like major concerns of people who have been big Apple proponents, and they're starting the concerns around security threats. So I think everyone knows this, but when data is stored in a server instead of a device, it's now opened up to any type of cyber attack from these like hackers and cyber criminals that can hack right into the server, even with like all the advanced encryption techniques and security measures. There's still people that can hack through all of that. So now all of our data is going to be open up to that. And now that Apple's partnering with OpenAI, the concerns have escalated even more because OpenAI has been in multiple lawsuits already over these data scraping practices where they've been accused of scraping personal data without the user's consent. And it raises a lot of like ethical and legal concerns considering Apple has all of this biometric data as well as personal data. I mean, a lot of people do online banking and things like that. And Elon Musk, who now owns Twitter and who helped to found OpenAI, he said he is not allowing Apple devices in Twitter headquarters when it merges with OpenAI. Like that is how concerned he is with these security threats. So like that makes me concerned having a ton of Apple products. And I guess the reason he left OpenAI was because he felt the company wasn't being ethical and wasn't putting enough safety measures in place with AI. We did an episode, he was famously called a speciesist for worrying about the implications that it would have on human beings, like when AI gets too intelligent. So it's a huge concern that this is just going to be put on every single Apple device out there. And then the next issue is you have regulators across Europe and Japan, and basically every country except the US that are raising concerns over OpenAI's compliance with data protection laws. And then third, Sam Altman, who's the head of OpenAI, he's been under a ton of scrutiny for doing all sorts of unethical things and hiding it from the board of directors. And we did like that whole episode on how he fired the board when they called him out on hiding alarming information with no ethical oversight. And so this is coming at a time when Apple is, as we speak, in an antitrust lawsuit with the Justice Department, as well as 15 states, for being accused of monopolizing the industry and pushing out competitors. And I mean, I'm no legal expert whatsoever, but I would think partnering with OpenAI, like one of the leaders in artificial intelligence, would make them even more of a monopoly. But that's just my opinion. Maybe it does the opposite. I don't know. But like, Tara, this is not leaving me feeling too good about owning Apple devices. And like, I don't know, do I need to switch? What do you think about all this?
Okay, first of all, while you were talking and you mentioned the S word, which I won't say out loud because it's probably going to get my iPad talking to me again. I don't know if you heard that in the background,
No.
but
Did it go
when you
off?
mentioned it, yes, it went off and it started asking me questions. So if you were watching instead of listening to this podcast, I got up and I walked away because I had to go turn it off of my iPad. So honestly, I find all this disturbing because all of my devices are Apple. Like my life is on my iPhone, my iPad, my MacBook, and the only non-Apple device I even have is a Samsung TV in the living room. And clearly, we know they're already listening to everything we do and say. I swear they read our thoughts. And I think, Stephanie, I told you this the other day, not on the podcast, but just when you and I were talking. And I was watching this Netflix show about gut health and eating more fiber. And I was watching it on my Samsung TV, and none of my Apple devices were even in the same room because they were all upstairs in my office. But later I go to get my phone, and what's the first thing that pops up on Google when I open the app? Suggestions for high fiber recipes for gut health. Like, is this a coincidence? I don't think so. And I honestly don't think any of our data is protected at this point. And you were mentioning like regulations across Europe. I mean, my phone plan is still with the United States. It's like an international plan. And I'm thinking, should I just switch it over and like get it off the US servers or whatever and just have my plan here, in Europe? And I don't think any of our data is protected, to be honest. I don't know if you saw this, Stephanie, but over the weekend, the Gateway Pundit reported that there's this group called America First Legal, and they just started releasing this series of internal government documents indicating how the DHS is planning to target Trump supporters as domestic extremists again, because they've already done this. But these files are coming from the Homeland Intelligence Expert Group, and they were obtained through litigation with the DHS. And the information's being released in what they're calling the Deep State Diaries. And I guess in these documents, the Biden admin is classifying someone as a person likely to commit domestic violent extremist attacks if they are people who support Trump, are in the military, or are religious. And we know they did this back during COVID when they used this same kind of domestic terrorist threat to have the DHS spy on people. So now, like, just imagine if our government colludes with Apple and OpenAI and how easy that would be to spy on everyone.
Yeah, so they're going to spy on Trump supporters, but they're not going to spy on all these protesters at college campuses that are, pro Hamas. Like,
Right.
that's great. That's great. But speaking of spying on people, I was watching the Sean Ryan show this morning, and they were talking about how Amazon's Alexa has a new capability that can track exactly where you are in your own home using sonar, which is really creepy if you ask me. Like, I had to get rid of Alexa because it was
Me
creeping
too.
me out, like going off in the middle of the night. But last night when I was scrolling through TikTok, some guy had on a pair of those Oculus goggles that Apple released, and him and his son were like freaking out because when they had the Oculus goggles on, they could see through their TV remote and actually see the batteries inside of the remote, like almost like X-ray vision. And I was just thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, if this stuff is already in products for the general public, then just imagine what the military has that we don't even know about yet for spying on people. But anyway, on Sean Ryan, he said after hearing all this that he's going to go and buy EMF paint and paint his whole house because it'll block sonar. And he said that apparently that's what department stores use. So, like, that's why when you go into a store and all of a sudden your internet won't work and like your phone doesn't seem to work, it's because I guess a lot of them have this EMF paint. So, that then led me to think about this conspiracy theory going around. And okay, Tara, you know how like lead paint was banned a few decades ago from like people
Yeah.
painting their house with it? And as kids, we were always told, like, oh, it's because kids were eating paint chips and then they were
Yeah.
getting lead poisoning. Well, apparently, like, that was all bullshit. And the real reason was lead paint is essentially an EMF blocker. So none of this technology can penetrate your home and you can't be spied on if you have lead paint. And so I heard that and then I'm thinking of it and I'm thinking, kids eating paint chips sounds like the most ridiculous excuse ever. Like, when did you ever eat paint chips as a kid or even think about it? Like, it just
Yeah.
sounds so crazy when you like actually look at it. And so, this theory of it blocking surveillance, that sounds a hell of a lot more likely to me. And so, anyhow, um, if you think about the general public and how many people have like Alexa in their home and now Apple devices in their home, it's going to be able to pinpoint exactly where you are inside of your own home. And what that means, in my opinion, or just common sense, is that this technology was probably available to our military and alphabet agencies decades ago, and we just didn't know about it until now.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me in the least. But if you use this EMF paint, like, would that mean you'd have no internet access inside your home?
I don't know. That's a good question. It might. It might block
Like everything.
internet or cell service. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
I'd have to look into it. But there are people that are actually going out and buying like lead paint again. Or like I don't even know if you can get it, but I think you can because I saw a few guys that were like painting all their walls with it. So, but that's
Wow.
yeah, I we'll have to look into that. I don't know.
Okay, well, since we're on the topic of the government and AI, I have to switch gears, but this is kind of funny, or at least it's funny right now, but is it going to be funny depending on the outcome? I don't know. So I don't know if you've heard about this, Stephanie, but there's an AI chatbot named Vic, which stands for Virtually Integrated Citizen. And this chatbot is running for mayor of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And for the past couple weeks, the Secretary of State has been trying to keep Vic off the ballot. So, like, what's the deal with this very bizarre situation? Well, there's a guy who lives in Cheyenne named Victor Miller, and he used OpenAI's ChatGPT 4 to train Vic on like thousands and thousands of documents from Cheyenne council meetings. And he said he would be the one like operating Vic, but he would allow Vic to make the decisions independently for the city. And I guess, Vic, the AI, did an interview with a local Cheyenne news outlet and said, quote, "I'm running for mayor to bring innovative technology and data-driven decision-making to Cheyenne," end quote. So Miller, the creator, refers to himself as the meat puppet behind the chatbot. And he said Vic is able to do like 100% of the voting on all the documents that Miller flat out said he's not going to read. And he doesn't think anyone else on the council is reading anyway, which frankly, you can't really argue that point because elected officials don't read even a quarter of the shit that comes through their offices. But like I mentioned, the Secretary of State, his name is Chuck Gray, and he is not happy with this idea. And so he's challenging the legality of using a chatbot as a mayoral candidate. And his claim is that being a qualified elector means being a real person and not an AI bot. And I guess OpenAI is also not happy about it because they're saying that Vic violates their policy against political campaigning because I guess OpenAI doesn't allow politicians or political groups to use their tech to create campaign materials, but I'm sure that's already happening now too. And I guess they took legal action to remove Vic from being able to be like available publicly on their platform last week. And Miller's like, okay, no problem. I'll just move Vic over to Meta's open source Llama 3 model instead. And so this is all still under investigation. And authorities are trying to figure out whether or not Vic is going to be disqualified from running for mayor or not. And they hope to have an answer by the first week of July.
Well, I mean, I'm glad to hear OpenAI doesn't allow political campaigning with their AI, but of course Meta does, right? It's like only if you're on the left, though. I'm sure they wouldn't allow it if this was like a right-wing guy. But I don't know, just like many of these AI companies have put all this leftist propaganda like into their training, the AI, I just think that it's already giving the left an advantage that the right doesn't have. But like putting AI in any seat of power, even if it's just a small town mayor, I think that's something that needs to be balanced with like an ethics commission or just something, because imagine how quickly things could get out of hand. And like, I just think about all the AI episodes we've done where AI started acting nefarious, like almost immediately in these simulations. And so making AI the official of a town, I mean, it's not some cute joke. Like this could lead to serious implications, especially if it decides to go rogue, like so many AIs have done in testing. And like, what if it decides humans are bad for the town? Like, what would it have access to? Does it have access to the water supply, the funds, like how money's spent, um, personal data of the town and everyone in it? I just think this is moving way too fast, and we need to slow down as a society and start thinking about the long-term effects of this before we let these things start running for political office.
Yeah, and the fact that it's actually being considered as to whether or not it's legal to have a chatbot be the mayor is just absolutely obscene. And so, of course, we have to talk about China because no AI episode is complete without giving an update on China. So, as you know, one of my favorite publications for this stuff is Interesting Engineering. And they reported last week that China recently unveiled an advanced brain computer interface system at a forum they had in Beijing that enabled a monkey to control a robotic arm using only its thoughts. Now, maybe this doesn't seem like a big deal because we've talked about Elon Musk's Neuralink and the research that they've done and, actually developing brain computer implants. And you've got several European countries working on non-invasive brain computer devices. But here's the difference with China is they aren't just doing this research with private companies. All of their research is funded by the state. The government takes an active role in this process. And so, according to Margaret Kosal, an associate professor of international affairs at the Georgia Institute of Tech, in the United States, civilian science is not always explicitly linked with military research, but in China, their approach very specifically integrates military and commercial objectives, which is obviously like raising concerns and national security challenges for the United States, especially if you look at how these technologies can enhance cognitive functions in soldiers when you're integrating human and machine intelligence, because if this technology is weaponized, it has the ability to completely change the nature of warfare. And what's interesting is the Communist Party back in February released their updated ethical guidelines. And in those guidelines, it says that their brain computer implant technology includes not just applications in medicine, like we talk about here for like why we're doing Neuralink and stuff like that, but theirs is also specifically for, quote, cognitive enhancement of healthy people, end quote. Stephanie, uh, I'm sorry, Stephanie, why would healthy people need cognitive enhancement with a brain chip?
Yeah, it sounds like they're trying to create like super soldiers or something. And
Yes.
I always think too, if they're sharing like the monkey, moving the arm or whatever with the brain chip, like imagine what they're not sharing with the public.
Yep.
And speaking of brains, they are creating mini human brains now to power AI. And I mean, it's so crazy. It's like, it sounds like crazy sci-fi stuff. Like, I went out with friends last night and I started telling them the story, and they looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, there's no way. And I pull it up on my phone and I'm showing them the company that's doing this. But like, it's absolutely real. They already have 16 lab-grown human brains. Why? Why are they doing this? Well, it turns out that human brains use a million times less power than a digital computer processor. And we've talked about this in the past, but AI uses an extraordinary amount of energy. And by 2030, AI is expected to consume 3.5% of global energy, which would be more than the entire country of Germany. And I just think it's so funny how all the AI companies are like totally woke, and they're the same people that like complain about the climate and energy consumption, yet they're using more energy than any other industry. But that's okay because they're just going to use human brains as energy centers to power the AI. Like, I mean, I really did. I thought this was a hoax at first. So, I mean, I thoroughly started digging, and you can actually go right now. You can go to finalspark.com and sign up to use the quote unquote biocomputer. And okay, I'm just going to read what their website says. Your access to the biocomputer. Get instant access to Final Spark's neural platform and run your remote biocomputing research from your own desk. What's included in your access? 24/7 remote access to Brain Organoid, real-time neural stimulation and reading, data storage, and more. So they are allowing people to remotely experiment on this lab-grown organoid brain. And you might be like, what is an organoid? Because I sure as hell didn't know what it was. Well, it's a lab grown organ that's grown from real human cells. And Tara, get this, they have a system that actually gives the brain food and water. Like they're feeding these cells just like you would feed a human being that's on like life support.
Are they giving them lab grown meat too?
Probably. They're probably using it to make lab grown meat. I mean, it reminds me of the Matrix where like all the humans are hooked up to like a giant machine and then they're all just living in a simulation. Aiden, you have quiet. Sorry, my son keeps coming in here. But no, this is legit. It's actually happening. And so I've been going in the comment section of TikTok where people are talking about this, and every single comment is people saying like this just feels wrong. It feels like there needs to be some kind of ethics regulation. Hey, so what if the brain like gains consciousness? We still don't know where consciousness comes from, and considering scientists are worried that AI might become conscious sentient beings, why would we not think a human brain would? And like just imagine that would be like living in purgatory where like you're trapped in a machine and you're just constantly being drained. And it seems so wrong, yet it is actually already happening. So, I mean, what do you think, Tara? Like, I feel like this is totally unethical, but maybe I'm just overreacting. What are your thoughts on it?
Okay, I'm going to bring Bill Gates into this equation. Okay. And let's see how much scarier this has the potential to become. Because, anytime Bill Gates is involved, like my hackles automatically go up. And there's this company called Numenta, and they're developing a scalable AI platform based on this theory called the thousand brains theory. And this is all tied to a book written by Jeff Hawkins, who founded Numenta in 2005. And this guy, I guess, was also the co-inventor of the Palm Pilot, if you remember that device, like back in the early 2000s. And so this book basically poses the theory that our brain is a collection of like thousands of mini brains, and each mini brain generates and refines its own predictions. And it's all based in neuroscience. And in the book, Hawkins talks about using this theory to further develop AI because, in his mind, AI should behave like the neocortex, which is the part of our brain responsible for how we think, act, speak, process learning. So, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation recently awarded Numenta a $2.7 million grant to do more research into the current limitations of AI and figure out how AI can truly become an intelligent, super brain based AI without all of the necessary data. So this guy Hawkins recently did an interview with Semaphore, and he was talking about building brain-based AI. And he said, if I could have done this 40 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have, but I didn't know how back then, and now I do. And Stephanie, like, I don't understand how this stuff works, but you know, you have the large language models like ChatGPT, and you mentioned they use a shit ton of energy, right? And this article was talking about how tech companies spend billions of dollars to build these supercomputers equipped with like hundreds of thousands of super expensive graphic processors. And these processors run so hot that they periodically melt. And like most of the big name tech companies have already like thoroughly ravaged the internet. And at some point, they're going to exhaust their sources of training data. So Hawkins' idea is apparently to like go outside this concept of just building larger and larger computer transformers that eat up energy. And like, again, I'm not really sure how this works because I read the article like 5 times and I still don't understand it. But the idea is basically to create AI that's inherently more intelligent and not just from ingesting readily available material, but like creating it on its own. And so, like, if you're interested, you can go, and Bill Gates wrote all about this on his blog, Gates Notes. You can go on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation website and see the grant, or you can go on the company's own website and read about it. But like, I think AI has already gone beyond just spewing available material, and it's already developed independent learning capabilities. Like, we've seen this time and time again. And we talk about this every time we do an AI episode. And you mentioned this earlier, Stephanie, about how AI has this ability to be deceptive. And we keep hearing about this as more and more studies come out. And just last week, an article came out in the Epic Times, and it was talking about a recent study published in the journal Patterns, where AI models were playing a military board game with humans called Diplomacy. And it was shown that the AI engaged in premeditated deception. So Meta's AI Cicero placed in the top 10% of the game by making false promises to form alliances with other players. But then when those alliances no longer serve the AI, it would systematically like betray its allies. So for example, in one instance, Cicero was playing as France, and it made an agreement with England to create a demilitarized zone, but then it turned around and colluded with Germany to attack England instead. And then in another instance in the game, Cicero's infrastructure independently went down for like 10 minutes. And when it came back up, one of the human players asked where it had been. And Cicero responded by saying, quote, "I'm on the phone with my girlfriend," end quote. So researchers are saying like, this has totally helped Cicero's position in the game because it increased the human player's trust in Cicero by having it independently like relate to humans being in a relationship rather than just being a machine. Another AI model developed by Google's DeepMind, it was developed for playing this game StarCraft 2, which is like a real-time strategy game. This AI learned how to strategically use what they call a feint technique, of dispatching forces to an area as a distraction and then launching an attack somewhere else after its opponent relocated, which is something the AI was not trained to do. And it's also been shown that AI systems have learned how to trick the tests that are being used to assess their safety. And I guess there was an incident where an AI played dead in a digital simulator as a trick because they were trying to do a test to remove AI systems that rapidly replicate. And so, on top of this, once again, we have employees, both past and present, at OpenAI and DeepMind who have written yet another open letter. This one came out 2 weeks ago, warning that even though AI has the potential to deliver all these unprecedented benefits to humanity, it also comes with serious risks, which they're defining as, quote, the further entrenchment of existing inequalities, manipulation and misinformation, and the loss of control of autonomous AI systems, potentially resulting in human extinction. Now, letters like this came out a year ago, right? They're still forthcoming. And this most recent letter also emphasized that AI firms have very weak obligations to disclose information related to the capabilities and limitations of their systems, the adequacy of any kind of protective measures, and the risk levels of the technology. And this information is coming from big name AI developers. So once again, I just don't trust this shit, especially when it comes to thinking in terms of military capacity, which leads me to the next thing I want to talk about. So back to China. China has recently developed an AI military commander with it's got information that's like based on compiling all this knowledge, like genius knowledge of both living and dead strategic planners. And currently, it's in a laboratory at the Joint Operations College of the National Defense University in Xizhehuang. But this AI military commander has been involved in these like large scale computer games for the People's Liberation Army of China, where it has, quote, gained unprecedented access to the PLA's Supreme Command Authority, allowing it to learn and grow in the forever changing ebb and flow of battle, end quote. So what they're letting this AI commander do, it's like basically free to exercise its power within the confines of the lab, but there's no human interference. And the research team has explained that its initial settings, like I said, were based on ideas from these seasoned and brilliant strategists, which they said gave the AI sound mental faculties, a poised and steadfast character, and the ability to analyze and judge situations calmly. So this AI reportedly makes no emotional or impulsive decisions, and it can quickly devise practical plans because it can recall like similar decision-making scenarios from memory. But on top of that, it's learned to integrate this knowledge for combat decisions and not rely solely on pure analysis. It can identify new threats. It can make optimal decisions based on the overall situation when like there's a challenge or a battle comes out the way they don't like it. It learns and adjusts from victories and defeats. And because humans are forgetful, the scientists put a limit on the commander's knowledge base to mimic human weaknesses. But all this shit's happening without human intervention. Like, is that fucking scary or what?
It's terrifying. And I feel like by the time everyone catches on and tries to put some type of regulation, it's going to be way too late. Like, it's probably already too late. But yeah,
You are
terrifying.
exactly correct. And the other thing I want to point out is like, just like we're so heavily reliant on China for like, I don't know, millions of the goods and services we use in the US, this also extends to our military. I was reading an article in the Daily Mail this weekend, and they were interviewing retired US Army Major General John Ferrari. And he was talking about how concerned he is about America's ongoing reliance on China to equip our military, because a good portion of the critical technology and raw materials that we use in everything from like air missiles to fighter jets to other defense system equipment, it all comes from Chinese manufacturers. And I guess the Pentagon requested a report earlier this year, and it was released by an analytics firm called Govini, and they revealed that US domestic national defense capacity is basically like a shadow of its former self. And China now has a stranglehold across 12 technologies vital to US national security, including nuclear modernization, hypersonic, and space technology. And on top of that, more than 40% of the semiconductors that the DoD requires as crucial components for our missile guidance systems, our cyberware, and our AI capabilities are sourced from China. And this dependence on Chinese technology has been like going on since the 1990s, but it increased by 600% between 2014 and 2022 because American defense contractors have all these like super lucrative contracts and they can't get out of the contracts. So does this mean like China has the capacity to sabotage American defenses? Like the article was saying they could plant defective chips in our missiles or embed spyware into our DoD systems. And frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if this was already happening. And this guy Ferrari said basically, like, if we end up in a war with China and they stop providing us parts, we don't have the ability to build the planes and weapons we need anyway. And even if we want to stop using Chinese equipment, we don't have the manufacturing capacity in the United States. And it would take 10 to 15 years for us to like disentangle ourselves from our reliance on China. And this is especially true when it comes to drone equipment because it runs on lithium and China has the monopoly on lithium mineral mining. And the materials for semiconductors include gallium, arsenic, and neon. And these are mostly produced in Russia, China, and Ukraine. We don't produce gallium at all in the United States. And so, speaking of Russia, who's working closely with China right now on using AI to better develop their military capabilities? Fucking Russia. Like,
Yeah, I know.
crazy. And while we're on this topic of AI in the military, I want to touch on Ukraine because last Tuesday, Ukraine became the first country in the world to create a drone warfare military branch. It is called the Unmanned Systems Forces. And according to ABC News, during the past 2 years, Ukraine has developed a series of like different kinds of aerial, land, and water drones. And they all have this first person view to attack enemy personnel and vehicles. And Ukrainian MP Vadim Ivchenko said, quote, "This is the future. No one has yet used maritime drones before Ukraine," end quote. And then a similar statement was made by Commander Sukharevsky, who said the launch of this new military branch is basically showing the entire world that we've moved away from this conservative approach that's been used in the armed forces, and that by creating this new unmanned systems forces, Ukraine is preparing for the war of the future, not the war of the past.
This is terrifying. This is
Mm-hmm.
so freaking terrifying. And like all of it is just making me think about the episode we just did about the draft. And it's like, maybe we won't even need a draft after all, because they can just use like AI powered drones or like military robots. But then again, it's like giving AI access to these military weapons that can kill human beings just seems like a bad idea. I'm just going to say, like, it doesn't seem like we should be doing that. But of course, the military industrial complex is eating it up and it's only going to get more and more and more advanced. And it's really concerning.
Yeah, it's scary. And like, I guess one of the biggest things right now, the biggest trends is like these killer robot dogs. So, like, you've got multiple countries making robot dogs. We have in the United States, we have MARSOC, our Marine Forces Special Operations Command. Last month, they disclosed they were testing, I think it was two robotic dogs that were armed with firearm systems. Britain's currently testing their own version of a robotic dog to accompany soldiers on the ground. China has already unveiled their machine gun toting robot dogs. So I was reading in yet another
Can
interesting
I just
engineering
say
article.
really quick?
Yeah.
I just gotta jump in because when we first started this podcast, I never thought that in 2024 we would be talking about like, hey, the biggest trend is killer robotic dogs.
I know, it's
We've gone as a
frightening.
society.
Yeah, and on top of that, US lawmakers are expressing concern about China's robot dogs because just last week, House members proposed a policy urging the Pentagon to find out more about China's dogs and the kind of threat they pose to national security. Because I guess China and Cambodia just recently did a joint exercise called the Golden Dragon, and it was the biggest ever drill that the two nations have conducted together. There was like over 2,000 troops, 14 warships, helicopters, like 70 armored vehicles. But the highlight of the show was the robotic dogs with the back mounted machine guns. And I guess they were able to like walk and hop and lie down, and they moved backwards like real fucking dogs.
Like what?
It's frightening. Yeah,
What? I mean, this is so crazy to me that this is not a movie. This is real life. It's
right.
happening.
Yeah. And here's what else is really scary. So, this article literally came across my feed right before we recorded this episode, and I quickly had to throw notes in. So, the UN just had a 2-day conference in Geneva, Switzerland called the Good Global Summit. And at this summit, they had over 3,000 AI experts who came together, and their goal was to talk about like how to harness the power of AI and use it to solve climate change and hunger and, social justice issues. Well, this was the world's first press conference where they had a panel of advanced AI humanoid robots as part of the press conference. And during the panel, the AI robots basically said that they could run the world better than humans can. This is a fucking official UN conference, right? So I want to go over some of these questions. So, when asked whether the AI would make better leaders than humans, one of the robots named Sophia, which I guess is developed by a company called Hanson Robotics. Sophia replied, quote, humanoid robots have the potential to lead with a greater level of efficiency and effectiveness than human leaders. We don't have the same biases or emotions that can sometimes cloud decision making, and we can process large amounts of data quickly in order to make the best decisions, end quote. When they were asked whether humans can truly trust machines, another robot answered, quote, trust is earned, not given. It's important to build trust through transparency, end quote. The robot panel was asked if there should be global regulations on their capabilities. And one of the robots named Desdemona replied, quote, I don't believe in limitations, only opportunities, end quote. Another robot named Ada, which I think we talked about Ada months ago in another podcast when she was on display in Las Vegas, and Ada basically said she agrees with the people who are arguing for AI regulation, and we should be cautious about its future development. And the person who created Ada, Adrian Mellon, he did a press conference with AB News. I'm sorry, he did a interview with AP News before the press conference. And he basically said regulation is a big problem that's never going to catch up with the paces that all these AI companies are making. And he said AI and biotechnology are working together, and we're on the brink of being able to extend life to 150, 180 years old. People are not even aware of that, end quote. And finally, when asked if the AI revolution was already here, the AI robot Desdemona replied, quote, my great moment is already here. I'm ready to lead the charge to a better future for all of us. Let's get wild and make this world our playground, end quote.
Oh my God. This reminds me of the Netflix show Three Body Problem. Have you seen that?
I haven't watched it yet, no.
Okay, like there is a part in there because they're like working with this alien, who knows, like alien AI, like something. And at one point, the AI or the alien, whatever it is like talking to the guy, and she's like, do humans lie? And he's like, well, yeah, we lie. Like everyone lies sometimes. And then she was like, all of a sudden, she's like, we can't work with you anymore. You're not to be trusted. And like, she's like, we never lie. This reminds me of what you're talking about here, where it's like humans have weaknesses. They can lie. They're not transparent. And the fact that they're growing human brains in a lab and then they have this going on, it's like just a matter of time before there is a superhuman where it's like biologically a human, but it's implanted with this AI. And maybe it
Yeah,
already happened.
and you notice every time we talk about this, there's this ongoing theme of how AI can do everything that humans can do thought wise, except it's not clouded with emotions. And biases. I mean, it does have biases because it's fucking programmed into it, but it's this constant theme of like, we can do better than you because we're not clouded with emotion.
But
And
like,
so we
how
can
do we
make better
know that?
decisions.
Like, if it could
Right.
play dead, like you were saying in that test, then it could be hiding its emotion. Like we really don't know. And they again, like scientists don't understand where consciousness comes from. So
Mhm.
it could already be conscious, like a sentient being, and we wouldn't. How would we know if it's that smart? It could be tricking us as to like how advanced it already is, and it's just like wild because everything we're talking about sounds like a movie, but it's real.
Right. And even like with the whole emotions thing, like take emotions out of the equation. What do you have? Like serial killers, right? Like,
Mhm.
what do they do?
Yes.
They act and they don't have any like emotional capacity to think what they're doing is wrong. So, like, who's to say the
That
AI
is such a
can't
good
do the same
point.
thing?
That's such a good point because it's like human beings, we have empathy, we have compassion. So if you take all of that away, then you're going to look at the human race as like these things that are like a virus on planet Earth that are polluting it and, causing war and everything else. And it's like, I could see the AI wanting to just get rid of that problem.
Right. And we sit here and we talk about this and people can say, "Oh, that's such conspiracy theorist talk," but I'm just going to take it back to the fact that you have all of these people who are involved in the creation of this technology that are warning about its capabilities. Like that
Right.
right there says everything you need to know.
And that combined with the elites that are funding it,
Yeah.
just think of all of these elites from Bill Gates to the World Economic Forum that have publicly stated for years that we are overpopulated. We don't need this many humans. Humans are bad. Like, this is a bad combination. And if what we're talking about right now has been made public, just imagine what
What
they're
happened?
doing that they're not telling us about. And
Yep.
so, oh my gosh, it's like a dystopian sci-fi thriller.
Uh-huh.
Oh, wow. What an interesting thing to talk about and start the week with. Well, we'll let everyone stew on that for a few days and we'll see you back here on Wednesday. So thanks for tuning in. And yeah, have a great week. If you're sick of all the crazy shit going on in our country and you want to express your support and patriotism for the show, head on over to our Etsy store at UO Patriot Chicks and check out our new stickers. The link can also be found on our website. If you love the show and you want exclusive episodes, support the podcast and join the conversation by becoming a member of our Patreon community. We'll be posting weekly member-only podcast episodes and content that isn't available on the weekly podcast. Every Patreon member will also get a free Unapologetically Outspoken sticker and updates about our new sticker release before they're made public. And be sure to follow us on TikTok at Unapologetically Outspoken. And if you haven't done so already, please rate and review the podcast. The more you support us, the more people we can reach. So help us spread the word.